Maybe I should wear socks because my feet are kind of cold.
I would.
Want to go get socks for me?
Which ones would be?
Thanks for my socks. Hey everyone, we are back.
We're back.
And in this video, we're going to talk about waiting. We mentioned it a tiny bit at the end of our last video, and then we had a lot of requests from people wanting to hear more about it. So here we are.
Awesome.
So Tim, first of all, what exactly do we mean when we refer to waiting?
So to put it in context, and maybe some of you haven't tuned in to a couple of our other videos, we're talking about potential relationships. We're talking about friendships and relationships and potential finding love. So in the journey of that, there's a time in there of waiting. And I would say I would define waiting as kind of being comfortable in the process of self-discovery, and then also in that process of finding a significant other. And you're waiting. The word waiting is like, well, I'm waiting for something to happen. But it is that period that I would say that you're growing and developing and you're seeking a relationship with somebody else. Does that kind of make sense?
So when we talk about waiting, we're referring to that time before you've found a significant other.
Yeah.
And you're just, maybe you're working, maybe you're a student, and you're in that space in between. It could be anything from like age 18 to, I think you can still be waiting when you're much, much older in life.
Yeah.
And for both of us, we were very passionate about this topic because we are both people who waited for a long time.
Yeah.
And that time is actually something we both appreciate.
Yes.
We often talk about the things we did when we were single and how we appreciate it, but it also gave us clarity so that when we did meet each other, we knew we had found the one because we had taken that time to think about it. So in this video, we're going to unpack what it meant for us, things we learned, and hopefully give some encouragement or advice if you find yourself in a season of waiting. So Tim, why don't you start first? How long did you wait for, and what did you do in that time?
So again, starting back to being in that place of self-discovery and saying to yourself that I want to find a significant other in life, or that I hope one day that I would be in a relationship with somebody I would fall in love with or be in love. I think for me, I spent many years kind of going through that journey, as Anita was saying. So it wasn't like it happened just in a moment. It was a conscious decision. I think what I would say about waiting is I think it's a decision. And a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today is making a decision that you make now that something will happen in the future. And I think that part is an interesting thing to discuss. So for me, I made a decision that while I was going through my life, that I was going to, and again, we use that word waiting, but it's kind of like waiting for the love of your life or waiting for love to happen. Maybe that's kind of what we're getting to, is I made a decision that I wasn't going to just not do anything, right? I had some passions, I had some dreams. I went to school, I became an engineer. I wanted to do things with my education. And then I ended up starting an international charity. So those were things that I was doing in my life. But I would also say I was waiting because I wasn't just in this place that I was unhappy because I didn't find that love of my life. So I would define for me that I made a decision that my life would continue. My life would go on. My goals in life would happen, even with not meeting somebody that I would say is the love of my life. So maybe I'll stop there and I'll let you kind of give your feedback to that, Anita, kind of how that happened for you.
I'm going to elaborate a little bit Because what I want people to know is,
Yeah.
you know, it includes the time when you were finishing up university and then you start working,
Yeah.
and then you eventually transition from working in corporate to
Yeah.
the charity, and this is many years. And for the same thing, it's me. It's that period when you finish school and you're working, and some people are getting married, having kids, and, you know, having a different priorities in life. And meanwhile, for me, in my season of waiting, I did a lot of travel. And from the time I was in undergrad until I was like in my mid-20s, I went to like 40-something countries.
Wow.
And, you know, became a traveling content creator, learned how to be a content creator, and also really built my skill set. And so, and then a couple years into that, I came back to Toronto, to the city, and then my priority was I wanted to learn how to work with organizations. So for some people in the season of waiting, I know there's a big feeling of like emptiness, and we'll talk more about this. And there's this feeling of like the world is passing you by and you got to do things. For me, I didn't have that same sense of emptiness, because I actually felt like the big thing for me was I really wanted to get back into, once I was back in the city working, I actually wanted to get back out into the world and travel, because I felt like that was when I felt most alive, and that was when I was living my purpose the most. And you know, that's not the whole truth. I would say the secret is not just to go travel the world. That's not the answer to all of life's problems. But for me at the time in my 20s, that's how I felt. And so at the same time, I'm really grateful that I had that time to travel. And Tim also did a lot of travel.
I did a lot of travel
without me, and I did a lot of travel without him. And those seasons of self-discovery, I think, are really important. For me, I found a type of courage, and it was kind of traveling on my own, backpacking East Africa on my own, that actually gave me the courage to eventually become an entrepreneur and take a different path of figuring out how to become a content creator. And there was, you know, and you learn even like a sense of independence, right? And this feeling that you can figure out your own way in the world. For me, when I first graduated school and decided to become a content creator, I didn't know anyone who was doing that. You know, this was like 10 years ago, which, you know, now I feel like it's pretty common. You know, everyone and their mother, and my mother runs a YouTube channel. But at the time, I didn't know anyone doing it. But it was, when I traveled, I took chances. I would meet people who would help me along the way. And meeting those kinds of mentors and friends just gave me this belief that the world is like ultimately good, that God would ultimately provide for me. And, you know, and as I kept going in life, and there were, you know, I came back to the city and had to figure out what I was going to do next with my life. And then I got a job and another job. And it was just like constantly figuring out, watching how your life is going to unfold. It was in that season of waiting where I really learned to trust God, and I know you did too.
Yeah.
And so this is the next thing I want to ask about.
Well, let me talk about, because I want to pick up on a word that you talked about.
Wait, let's start, because we both coughed. Just start your thought again.
So let me pick up on a word that you talked about, which I think is important, and I'm seeing it on all the comments, is this word of comparison. So even if you think about your life, and we're talking about this season of waiting, you know, and you look and you say, well, my friends and my cousins and my family members, they're all finding their loves, or they're all dating, or they're all doing things that I'm not. And you got to be careful that you don't live your life in this idea of always comparing, right? And comparing, you know, social media, a lot of it is comparing. So for me, it was getting comfortable with who I was, and getting comfortable to go on the journey of knowing I needed to get better. One of the things we talk about is, are you ready? If you thought about yourself at this moment and you said the love of your life is going to show up in your life right at this moment, can you actually say you're ready? Or could you say, well, maybe I need a year, 2 years, maybe I need to mature, maybe there's some things we need to do. So I think that idea of comparison kind of puts a lot of weight on you, and you might feel like, well, I have to do it. My parents are saying this, or friends are putting on it, or even with me, my friends were getting married, and then they eventually had kids, and there I was in this holding, I won't call it a holding pattern, but I was waiting that the right person would come. And I just want to encourage you that waiting isn't a bad thing. Being at peace with yourself is good, right? And self-discovery and saying, well, I want to be the best person that I can be for that person. So when I talk about Anita, if Anita came into my life, and we have this running joke, and I would say to Anita, why didn't you show up into my life earlier? Why didn't you come so many years earlier into my life? And the joke is, I wasn't ready. I wasn't the same person I was many, years ago. And who I was when Anita met me, and we're always changing, I would say that was the time that Anita should have met me, right? So think about that, because it's a very personal thing that you can think of. What do you think about that comparison kind of, and it's kind of how social media works. That person has a nice new car, that person has a new iPod, or that person has a new computer, or that person has new clothes. I want what they have, right? And that idea of comparison is what drives our society sometimes.
So I like that you mentioned this idea of feeling that you need more time.
Right.
Because I felt that. And there was actually a chapter of my life where I was telling God, don't bring me this person yet. Like, I don't want them to come until my early 30s at the earliest. So I know for some people that's maybe they think that that's late, but I didn't want to meet this person. In my late 20s, I had just come back to the city and I was working, and I felt like there were so many things I still wanted to experience by myself, for myself, right? So working on my own, living on my own, even like your daily rhythms, like being able to wake up on my own, cook, eat, choose what I want to eat, do whatever I want to do after work. Yeah. So all of that only happens when you're single. And I really enjoyed, there's a certain kind of like steadiness and peace that you find in your life when you're single. And that's a season to embrace. Yeah. So I love that you mentioned this, and that's something you can even ask yourself, like as you're watching this, like if your person arrived tomorrow, would you be able to recognize them, and would you be able to receive all the love that they might have for you? Because you'll just kind of know. And I remember, at the time in my late 20s, I had broken up not too long ago, and I just had this feeling that like I wanted to like fully recover so that whenever someone does come to me, I am able to fully receive them, that I can see them for who they are and not just, based on who I want someone else to be. And so it's a really personal thing, and you might feel like, well, how come I don't feel like I'm ready for someone, but someone else thinks that like, maybe they want to date you and you don't want to date them yet. In the waiting, in this season where, as Tim said, you give yourself permission to not have to rush into things, you actually get to honor yourself. And I think in a way you also honor someone else, like your future partner. Because if somebody, really likes you and they want to date you, but you don't feel ready, if they genuinely want to be with you, then they will still be there. Or if they're meant to be with you, they will still be there on the other side of when you've like processed what you need to. And so that sort of in between is definitely lost in our culture, I think, because like movies show us, and it's, you hear stories of people who break up and then like a month, a week, very quickly they're dating someone else, and, we're not here to judge how long that in between time should be. But I do think yourself, and you'll feel it. You really will feel it in your heart, in your soul, in your mind when you're ready for someone else. Let's talk about working on ourselves. What does that mean, and what did that look like for you?
So for me, again, I was somebody, So I've talked about this on our first YouTube. I'm somebody who has achondroplasia dwarfism, right? So I had to also go through the journey of self-love for myself, and to say, well, as somebody who is growing up with dwarfism, what's my outlook going to be in my life journey? Am I going to kind of have a grudge on my shoulder, a chip on my shoulder, saying the world has been bad against me, or I've been dealt this deck of cards or this hand of cards that aren't good, and am I going to be just live a life of being grudging and be upset about how that I've been dealt this deck of cards of being a dwarf? Or am I going to embrace it and figure out a way to say, you know what, life has dealt me, I'm going to deal with. And when I talk about dwarfism, or me being a dwarf, you might say, well, maybe it is, I can compare it to something in your life. So for me, I had to go through that process of figuring out myself, figuring out, do I actually love myself? Do I actually think good of myself? Do I actually want to do better than I am right now? Do I actually want to do something that can make an impact in the world? Do I want to put my efforts into figuring out what my gifts are? Everyone, who is watching this episode here, you're good at certain things and you might not be as good at other things. You might be passionate in some things and you might not be as passionate in other things. And it's figuring out those things that you would pursue, right? So that's kind of what I started to do. I found some mentors and I put some time in. As Anita was saying, I became an engineer, right? I went to school to become an engineer, and I said, well, I want to figure out the skill set of being an engineer to eventually help humanity and help people. So I was kind of going through that journey of loving myself, understanding, that I'm going to live being a dwarf for the rest of my life. How is this going to work in my journey of finding a significant other? How's this going to work with finding somebody to love me? And if you don't love yourself, I will say this, I've met so many people in my life, and along the journey of meeting them, and you sit down and you start talking to them, you start to realize very quickly if they like themselves. And you might be like, whoa, Tim, how do you know that? Because you can tell and you can understand when you get into conversations with people if they don't like themselves. And I would sit down with people and I'd be like, you're the most beautiful person. I remember sitting down with people, I would be like, in my mind, I'm like, you're the most beautiful person I've seen, but you don't like yourself. You're insecure. And I would be like, this doesn't make sense, right? So I would say, take the time, as Anita was saying, take that time that you need to work on yourself, become better, set some goals, go get your life moving, and then go on the journey.
Yeah.
Right?
And I like using this time to discover what you love about yourself is so important. And another way I think we would say it is, in this time you can discover what your purpose is. And by that we mean like discover what you're good at. Like this is another thing, right? You can invest time and money into like your hobbies, your passions, the things you want to pursue. I know that there are those times where we're like, yeah, but I wish that my person was there so I could do it with them. But there's something to be said about doing it by yourself, right? Whether, like for me, travel was one of those things. If you're passionate about art, or like you want to become a pro snowboarder or something, right? There's some sport you want to pursue. There's something to be said about, when you're able to, you can find your own job, you're able to make your own money, you're able to make those kinds of decisions for yourself. And again, it's, while it's nice to do those kinds of things with someone, there is a lot of value in doing it by yourself, because you gain a certain level of confidence that shines through. And I think that's what Tim's referring to. And to be honest, that's what I felt like when I met Tim. there was none of this sense of like, you know, oh, look at me, you know, I'm short. It just felt like he knew he had a sense of focus and what he was building. And I would like to believe that that's how I felt at that time in life too. I had a job that I really loved, helping to build a travel company. And it felt like my dream job at the time. But the way I found my route to that dream job happened in the waiting, right? Where I had a lot of time, energy, mental space to focus on my career, the skills I wanted to develop. I would go to events and conferences and I'd meet people. So there was a lot of mental bandwidth to pursue the things I wanted to in that season where I was single. And I should add, it's also not just about like, it is a time to make your own money, which also has its benefits. But even if making money wasn't a priority, like for me, many of those years single, making money wasn't a priority. And so like I traveled on a budget and I loved it. And there was something to be said about finding a sense of security and a sense of identity away from money as well, right? That like I found a version of myself traveling that had nothing to do with my career, and I loved that part of me too. So, and in that season of waiting, like another thing that you get to invest in is friendships. And you know, we talked about value of friendship in last video, but even let's talk about like the friends we got to build outside of, like not just friendship between us, but like you have great friends that you've kept for decades, and I have friends that I've met all around the world, and all of that happened because, you know, we weren't so like laser focused on one person.
Yeah, we mentioned this last time, is take the time to build friendships. And one of the things I had to deal with even when I was meeting Anita is I was just wanting to build a friendship first, right? So sometimes when you meet somebody, you know, you all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm going to marry them. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you really just want to spend that time in saying, can I value that person? Can I respect them? And can I build a friendship with them? And when you put that in that context, you're going to have some wonderful, healthy friendships. Everybody that comes into your life isn't meant that you marry them, right? Or you date them. There's some wonderful people that will come into your life that you'll be like, here's somebody I want to become friends with, that they're going to be solid people. In my life, as Anita said, I have some wonderful friends, some amazing friends that I just wanted to invest in. They invested in me, and we're friends so many years later. So think about that as you go on your journey. Is in your waiting season, you're not always saying, well, is that the person? Is that the next person? Is that the person I'm going to marry? Rather than saying, well, that person, I just want to get to know them. I want to see how they work and they operate. I want to see and just build a nice friendship with them.
Yeah,
right?
and like maybe I know it's hard to see sometimes in the moment when you are looking for someone, but what if somebody like you're friends with them for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I feel like the older I get, the more I get to hear stories from people who are like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, how do you know that famous person or that, you know, CEO and they're like, oh, we went to school together. We were friends for like 20, 30, 40 years. Like that only happens when you've actually spent time building friendships. Okay, there's something we definitely need to talk about, which is how the waiting teaches you to trust God and how that actually changes you and makes you like a better, more patient, grounded person. You want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So again, I go back to you thinking about yourself, right? If you believe in a higher power, like Anita and I believe that there's a God out there that wants the best for us, right? So for me, I had to trust that my life, whatever may come, whatever may happen, the best things in my life were going to happen in a sense, right? So in that journey, I'm saying, well, I want to trust God that this person that I hope to meet, this person I hope to fall in love with and marry, to be my significant other, is going to come, right? And there's this trusting in the waiting that also brings a calmness, right? So when you trust somebody, you become calm. When you distrust somebody, so let's just use an example that might be relatable. You might have people in your life you don't trust, you don't like, and you just get tense when you're around them, or you get frazzled when you're around them, and you know right away. And you're like, I don't like this person, I don't like it. But when you're around people that you trust, when you're around people that you have this trust with, you're comfortable, and you become calm, and you become comfortable, and things become a little bit, what I would say, easier in the journey. So in this relationship that I had with God, I trusted that there was a higher power. I trusted that there was a God that had my best interest at heart. And I became calm, right? I became like comfortable in knowing that everything was going to work out. Everything was going to happen. And in the waiting, it's this idea of I want to be comfortable knowing that my future is in the hands of a higher power, right? In God. So I would say that was something I had to deal with as well, right? I had to say, well, if I do believe in a God, am I going to put faith in that God for my life, right? And that's kind of what I did. And it's not something you just do one time and you walk away and say, well, it's something that you journey through and you say, well, time goes by, or you go to a friend's wedding and you're like, oh, everyone's asking me why I'm not married. Everyone's asking me, they're trying to set me up with other people, and it's in being in that comfort spot and the comfortability to say, you know what, I am trusting God. I'm trusting the person that I believe in this higher power, this entity, this supernatural being that I trust, that my life will be okay. And that's kind of what I became comfortable in.
So for me, the journey of learning to trust God was much more meandering. And I actually ended up doing a Master's of Divinity at Seminary in Toronto while I was also waiting, partly because I just needed something to do. When you're in the waiting, you might have more energy and you're just like, you want things to happen. And it is a great opportunity to also pursue some education or learn new things if you want. So as a part of my Master's of Divinity, I felt like I went way in the deep end about learning about God and theology and Christianity and Jesus and Holy Spirit. And I got to kind of plumb the depths of what I actually believe. And it would take me a really long time to try to explain why I believe what I believe. And not everyone maybe needs to do it. I kind of think of like doing a theology degree as like air. Do I understand all of the chemistry of of oxygen and carbon dioxide and and gases and greenhouse gases and pollution? Or can I just breathe the air and is that enough? So some people want to know that stuff and some people are okay just breathing oxygen and living. And so learning about God was kind of like that for me. So, and a positive thing that came out of my master's was also that my divinity program included therapy. So for the first year, you had to go to a couple counseling sessions, but they called it self-awareness sessions because the school also has a counseling program. And then if you wanted to, you could continue. And normally you'd have to pay like a student pricing. But because it happened during the pandemic, I actually ended up getting free counseling as a part of my Master's of Divinity degree for 4 years. So there's a couple $1,000s of therapy there. And while I didn't go to the school to get therapy, it did help me. And I see it as one of those ways that God will orchestrate the circumstances of your life so that you could heal and you can address the things that you need to. You can pull the skeletons out of the closet, and with him you find the courage to look at your own brokenness, your wounds. It could be things with a family. For me, some of it was tied to my family and just like the kind of grudges that we might develop when we're young, and just learning to forgive and heal and move on. And it's if anyone's ever done counseling or therapy, you know what it means to just like actually find a safe space to open your heart and to let things out and to feel that kind of healing and resolution that comes from looking at things that are challenging in your own life. And so I got to do that while I was in the waiting and single and in the pandemic, and also completing this degree. And so for me, that experience, completing the degree, getting to do all that therapy, and I was also with a Christian counselor, and as a part of my degree, this was a God thing, I got an opportunity to make a podcast for the university, and we'll link it in the description box. It's called Heavenly Minded, Earthly Good. It actually walks through my journey of, becoming a content creator, and then how that all fell apart, and then how I ended up doing a Master's of Divinity, and what God meant to me, having grown up as a pastor's kid, and then, you could say, walked away from God in a sense for a number of years, and then coming back to the city, and of all things, doing a Master's of Divinity, and then, so if you want, you can listen to that podcast and you'll get a deeper sense of that story. But for me, that time in between where I wasn't focused on having like my future partner be the solution to my problems, there's something really valuable that happens in that time where I learned, and I had to go to God for the answers that I couldn't find myself. I went to God with problems that I couldn't solve myself. I went to God with questions that I couldn't answer myself. And I dug through it, right? I read tons of books. I listened to so many sermons. I did a whole lot of soul searching and filled so many journals. But all of that, created this, I guess the best, some kind of alchemy that can only happen when you're single. You have the mental space to look at yourself, to look at your own heart, to seek forgiveness, to forgive others, to find a different type of spiritual self-confidence, we'll call it, right? This kind of soul confidence. And through walking through all of that, and talking to God a lot too. I guess that's, instead of talking to someone else, as soon as Tim and I started dating, I still prayed and stuff, but I probably prayed a little less because I would talk to Tim instead. Even now, there's people I don't get to talk to as much because I talk to Tim a lot. So while you're single, you get to talk to God a lot. And that comes with this incredible spiritual intimacy and this opportunity to get to know the creator of the universe in a way that you might not. And wherever you are in your spiritual journey, if God feels like a distant memory, someone, you left behind, or someone you're discovering brand new, I think we just want to encourage you. I would encourage you to take a look at that aspect of your soul a little bit more, because having a rich relationship with God is one of the best things you can have in life. And it is ultimately better than even finding your future love. If you can have a rich relationship with God, you will actually have all the provision, everything that you'll need in life.
So think about what Anita's just said. If we got together, Anita and I, before she went through that journey, and even with me and my journey that I've described a bit, the timing would not have been correct. And that's why Anita's described so beautifully, the waiting is a beautiful thing. The waiting is a precious thing. And when you're in that time and season, and Anita mentioned also, had a relationship that ended. Maybe you've had a relationship that's ended, or maybe you have divorced, right? There's so many different scenarios that life brings us, that the time of waiting is so important in your journey. And that's all we really want to talk about, that it's been such a wonderful thing for both of us. And I couldn't be more thankful. And it's easier, they say hindsight is almost like 20/20, right? To look backwards, it's easier to celebrate looking backwards than it is forwards, because you don't know. But you will be thankful when you take that time to do that. And time is on your side, right? And that's one thing I would say. Time is on your side.
Because God is on your side.
Because God's on your side. So one of the last things we want to talk about is advice and tips. And why don't you start, Anita, and tell us any advice or tips that you have for anybody that's watching.
Sure. I would start with journaling and figuring out for yourself, like, what do you want to do with this time? You know, what's a priority for you? Maybe you want to work on your health and fitness. Maybe you want to go back to school for something, and study a different field. Maybe there's a stack of books you want to read. Maybe there's a church you want to go to. Like, maybe there's a country you want to go to. I would take a look at those things and treat them as something sacred, because I think that when something really like calls to you from inside, there's a reason that you feel called to it. There's something you're going to learn there, something you're going to heal or grow from, and so it's worth spending time doing those things. And pick your top 3 and then actually think through, like, how much money would it take to do this, if any? How much time would it take? And which of these would I want to do first? And when you look at that, then you'll be able to see that you have, while you might have a lack of romance in your life, so that's one way of looking at it, you also have an abundance of your own time and focus that you can put into these other things that you love. And then I would go for it. I would just apply. I would if you're there's so many things you can learn online now that if you don't know how to do it, like anything you could possibly want to do, even just ask AI, how do I do this? And then and then see what it suggests, and put some of your time and energy and money, if that's available to you, ask for resources, ask the people that you know for advice or for help, and get going, because there's so much joy that comes, because this is something we both believe. When you're doing something that you love, it's like you become a different person. I definitely feel that when I'm doing something that I enjoy, it's like something in me wakes up and I feel like a different person. I probably talk to people differently. You have a different energy about you. And I believe, one word for that, that's like God's spirit in you, the DNA and the passions he put in you coming forth and like blossoming into who you were created to be. So use that time to let yourself blossom. Okay, what about you? What advice or tips?
I love it. So I'll say a couple things. The first one is, don't be afraid to spend time alone, right? So get comfortable to spend time alone. In our noisy world, our busyness, turn the phones off, turn the laptops, anything that's distracting, turn it off, and just say, I'm going to spend a couple hours just by myself and just to think, right? So your brain and your head just gets clearer and clearer, and make that a little bit of a routine, so that you can start to think. A lot of times we fill those silent moments by our phone, right? Our phone's in our pocket and, oh, there's silence. I better check what's going on the sports or Instagram. So my advice is, don't be worried about getting comfortable to spend time alone. And you might say, well, I'm not an introvert, so I like to be around people. But you need that time alone just so you can hear yourself think and start to figure things out. And I think that is something I would recommend as well. The other thing I would say, don't be afraid, just like Anita. Anita was on her journey. Anita was doing things when I met her. Anita just wasn't sitting at a house and doing nothing. When I met Anita, she was building that company. She had all these goals that she was doing. She had traveled. So there were so many things that when I met Anita, she became so attracted to so attractive, right? So one of the things that we both believe is, when you're going, you'll find your person on your journey. But if you're not on a journey, I'm not saying you won't find the person, but it's so nice to find the person when you're on that journey. So you might say, well, how am I going to find somebody if I only like sports and I only like weightlifting, or I only like canoeing or kayaking? How am I going to find that person if I'm on a kayak and that person's somewhere else? Don't worry about that. Just go in the direction that you figured out of who you are, and that person you'll find them because you become attractive. Even when if you read our love story, we had mutual friends that told me that Anita had moved to this city called Niagara, and they told me. So I didn't have to go to figure out that Anita had moved to Niagara in a sense, right? So friends and people around you will tell you kind of what's happening with different people. So my encouragement to you is don't be afraid to spend time by yourself. Figure out to hear your own voice and to work on yourself. Put the phones down, put every distraction down, turn it off. Second, don't be afraid to get on that journey and start moving, and then enjoy all of the people you're going to meet. One of the things I tell people to do is when you start to discover who you are, don't be afraid to talk about yourself. Don't be afraid to say, well, I like skiing, or I like canoeing, or I like knitting, because what you'll find is when you just put that out in the atmosphere, you'll start to meet mutual people and be like, oh, you like canoeing? I know some people that like canoeing, right? So once you start doing that, you will start to see this community of people and friends start to grow around you. So that's my advice, and it works, right? You become attractive and magnetic in pursuing the things that God created you. God created me with somebody with dwarfism, as Anita was saying, but I didn't let it pull me down. I didn't let it become a chip on my shoulder. I let it be something that I wanted to use to become a better person. And by the time I met Anita, she, saw something in me that was attractive.
I would end with this one. One thing I've always believed is that rather than like sitting around waiting for someone to come to me, if I was living my life to the fullest, that person would meet me along that journey. That the best thing I could do to bring that person towards me, or the best thing I could do to lead myself closer to this person that I would meet one day, was just to live my life to the fullest. And whatever that means for you, it doesn't have to be these big extravagant things. It could be like you can go to another country and go get a master's degree, or go climb a mountain, or or start a charity. But usually we don't live with we don't start out making those big decisions, right? It starts out with little things of just like, what does it feel like to try that? And then moving forward with that. And so I would say, allow the season of singleness to be something like sacred, precious, beautiful, like a chapter of your life you might, that will never come back to you in the exact same way. And so let yourself receive all of its gifts, enjoy it for what it is, make the most of it, and just trust that person is going to show up for you when they're meant to. Because that's another big thing. Like, why would you want to meet them before they're ready? I always felt like if I'm not ready yet, then that person must not be ready either. And I would rather have like a mature grown man than an immature boy. That's how I felt at the time. And, or whatever that version is for you, like just trust that when you're ready, they're going to be ready as well. And that's what ultimately makes a better relationship anyway, right? It's two people who have a good sense of themselves, who have a sense of purpose, and there's nothing wrong with meeting later in life, because it's a good chance you're a little bit more financially stable, your career is a little bit more stable. Like there's some pros, there's some like practical pluses to meeting later in life too. And then the best, more than just the practical, like spiritually, emotionally, you're going to be more mature and more wise, more grounded, more ready to give love and to receive love from this person.
I love that. Give love and receive love. And that's something that has been so amazing between Anita and I, is being able to give love to Anita and then also to be able to receive love. Giving love is one thing, but also for me to receive Anita's love is another thing. So I just love how you said that. And I needed to be ready. I needed to grow and mature and be in that place that I can receive your love. and then also give you love. And that's the great thing about what we're talking about, waiting.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful for you. If you have questions, thoughts, comments on this topic, we would love to hear. And yeah, we really hope that this encourages you to go through life at your own pace. Trust that your person's going to come. Enjoy the seasons as they come to you. You know, just like we are enjoying being newlyweds and married, you know, we also enjoyed when we were single and not making YouTube videos together. So there's gifts in every season.
Awesome.
We'll see you soon.